Picture this. You're miles from civilization, in a quiet, secluded cabin, where nature's silence is the only sound, until it's not. The creak of a floorboard, the shadow outside the window, and the sudden feeling you're not alone. These are two actual cabin horror stories that will make your next escape into the woods a nightmare you won't forget. Cabins are often seen as peaceful escapes from the busy world, but for some, these serene hideaways became the backdrop for terrifying, unexplained events. From mysterious deaths to eerie encounters, the stories you're about to hear are based on real-life events that defy logic. Whether it's the isolation or something far darker lurking in the woods, these unsettling tales will leave you questioning how safe you really are out there. Story number 1. I was therefore residing in a lovely cottage in Ontario. This particular home was one of 12 in a small community that surrounded a lovely park in a semicircle. There was a tiny playground, a picnic area, and big trees in the park. The cabins were beside a lovely lake where one could canoe, swim, and fish. My older brother and I made friends with a 14-year-old boy named Brandon while we were there. Rather than spending time with his family, Brandon had a tendency to drift off and prefer to hang out with us. When I was younger, I didn't know why someone wouldn't want to spend time with their parents. Perhaps it was because I used to be a bit of a goody-goody. I always followed my parents' instructions, obeyed the law, and made an effort to avoid difficulty. Furthermore, because Brandon was a bit of a troublemaker, I don't really like him. However, he was my brother's close buddy, and I would always follow my brother about since I respected him so highly, even if it meant spending time with Brandon. I believe my brother was the coolest person alive, and I wanted to do everything he did. After a while, Brandon decided to go without telling anyone, and my brother went with him naturally. I was forced to go with them because we shared a room. Initially, we just strolled into the park and spent some time there, taking in the peaceful night and the refreshing wind rustling through the trees. However, we quickly became bored and desired to engage in more thrilling activities. My suggestion was that we end the evening and go to bed, but the older children were making the final decisions. I tried to argue against Brandon's suggestion to explore the woods, but they just ignored me. With reluctance, we ventured into the forest, relying solely on the dim illumination from Brandon's phone to direct us. Fortunately, there wasn't much dense forests. Just a few miles away, you could even hear the distant hum of the highway. I wanted to go back after a little walk, but I was stuck with them, or I could walk back alone in the dark. It took me some time to understand that there was silence in the woods. Not a wind, not owls, not crickets. When I brought this up, we all paused and paid attention. There was total stillness for a few seconds before my brother, appearing irritated, piped out, "Please keep quiet. I'll try to pay attention." Perplexed, I told him that I had made no noise. He then advised me to keep it down and highlighted the heavy breathing, likening it to that of a dying pig. As I was about to argue, I became aware of breathing as well. It sounded hard and was weighty. "That's not me. I can hear it too," I muttered. My brother gave me a look, and then his breathing became more rapid, as though he was excited. There were 2 lights above us. They swung softly from side to side, glowing brilliantly in a dazzling blue tint. It was as like we were under a spell since we couldn't take our eyes off of them. A spooky moan suddenly sounded, sending shivers down our spines. It sounded like the desperate gasping for air of someone who had been smoking for years, trying to shout. And we took off sprinting. Behind us, we could hear trees trembling and branches shattering. It appeared to be in the trees, whatever it was. My little feet prevent me from running too fast, so I knew I couldn't sustain it for too long. My legs began to hurt, and I was forced to stop as my brother and Brandon continued to race ahead of me. Nevertheless, the object, whatever it was rapidly approaching. I then jumped into a neighboring bush. Unfortunately, though, as it turned out to be a thorn bush, I had cuts and scratches all over me in a matter of seconds. I had to bite my lip to keep from sobbing in agony. I was sitting there, trying not to talk, when I heard something heavy fall on the surrounding woodland floor. I noticed the two lights from earlier shining into the little clearing where I was hiding in the bush. These were not lights, though. They were eyes. Something that appeared to be from a terrifying dream was visible through those eyes. It had thin skin, stood roughly 7 feet tall, and had dark gray skin. It has elongated arms with claws at the tips. It stood looking around for a long while, attempting to locate me. I hid for hours in that thicket, not daring to come out until I saw the sun come up over the horizon. Then I sprinted as hard as I could toward the direction I believed the cabin to be. I didn't give a damn that the thorn bush was tearing my clothes to pieces, or that I was bleeding profusely. I raced, pushing into the trees for what seemed like an eternity, oblivious to the searing sensation in my legs. As I emerged from the forest, I fell onto a busy road. The next thing I knew, I was in a hospital bed with worried looks and beeping machines all around me. It seems that I was seen coming out of the woods with torn pajamas by someone who called for assistance. Nobody seemed to believe me when I tried to explain what had happened. I persisted, but everyone assumed that my prolonged stay in the woods was the cause of my hallucinations. My brother returned home while I was gone, and he didn't tell me what had happened until the next morning. It's been over 7 long years since those terrifying events, and I've spent countless hours scouring the internet, desperately searching for any information that might help me identify that mysterious creature. Then, a search party had been organized before they received the call to come get me. Story number 2. A couple of years ago, before the pandemic, I was struggling with my mental health and feeling increasingly isolated. My relationship with my parents was strained, and a close friend I had gone on a few dates with unexpectedly moved away, which left me feeling lost. As I navigated these challenges, I began having horrifying nightmares. Each time I fell asleep, darkness would envelop me, accompanied by a heavy, cold sensation in my gut that triggered intense anxiety. In these dreams, I often found myself surrounded by people who would either vanish into the shadows or stare blankly at me, which only heightened my feelings of dread. The experience was suffocating, and I would wake up feeling paralyzed and terrified, often lying awake for hours dreading the return of those nightmares. During this difficult time, I moved in with my best friend, Amelia, who owned a small cabin in the country. She was incredibly supportive and deeply religious. One night, while she was away, I had a particularly intense dream. I was driving in the dark when my headlights suddenly went out, and a menacing presence gripped me, pulling my head back. In my panic, I remembered Amelia's advice about prayer. I cried out to God for help, asking for protection. As soon as I did, the suffocating grip began to loosen, and I woke up feeling relieved but still shaken. To my horror, I then saw a pair of glowing red eyes staring at me through the chimney window, a figure towering over the cabin. I immediately called Amelia, who prayed for me and instructed me to burn white sage. By the time she arrived, the dark atmosphere had lifted. After that night, I began attending church with Amelia and incorporated prayer into my daily routine. Since then, I haven't experienced those nightmares again. I moved into my own apartment, grateful for the support of my friend and the newfound peace I had discovered through faith and connection. And there you have it, -2 real-life stories that prove the woods aren't always as peaceful as they seem. Before you book your next cabin retreat, remember, sometimes the scariest part isn't the isolation. It's what might be watching from the shadows. If these stories left you on edge, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more terrifying tales. Stay safe out there.